This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I want to talk about the rapid changes that are happening in America and the acceleration of those changes and what those changes will mean for you individually, your children, grandchildren, and our society. Now, the changes that I'm talking about are changes on many different levels. We could talk about social changes, economic changes, societal norm changes, changes in sexuality and sexual conduct, changes in the marriage relationship, changes in just the way that people interact with one another is completely different now than it was, let's say, 25 years ago or more. People have been neurologically rewired without even realizing it. And the way they speak, the way they think, how they react, et cetera, is totally different than it was 25 years ago or more. On top of that, we have very intense pressures upon our society from a number of sources, but the sources that are placing this enormous pressure upon society have enormous power. For example, the mainstream media is placing deliberately enormous pressure on our society. The internet, social media, the big tech companies, culture, education, and many other sectors in our society are artificially placing enormous pressure on our society. Why? Because it is their expectation that by applying significant pressure in key areas in our society and culture, that by applying pressure to those key areas, they can disintegrate the existing social norms, the existing social economic order, and they can replace it with what they've always wanted to do, which is replace it with some kind of new order, both in the United States and around the world. So what we're seeing is, unless you're incredibly naive and blind, what we're seeing is an orchestrated, planned, strategic attempt to continue to transform America with a radical acceleration and transform America into what? Into a totally post-Christian culture, a pagan culture by design, to transform America into like a tribalistic society, a third world nation society. And all of this, the main area of emphasis is in the battle for the human mind and the human heart. And that's why I devote so much time talking about that. I devote time talking about it because it is conspicuously absent from the conversation of the vast majority of people I know who call themselves Christians. And then even among Christian leaders, the topic for the battle of the mind is usually minimalized and trivialized so that it becomes the whole order of discussion revolves around things like, did I forgive somebody? Or, am I able to keep control of my temper? Or am I able to, curb my spending habits or whatever? It's not that these things are not valid. It's not that these things are not important to discuss. It's not that these things are not answerable by the Bible. But if you're taking a powerful subject like the battle for the mind and you're reducing it to its lowest common denominator, in other words, you're trivializing it, you're essentially missing the priority. You're essentially missing the big picture. And you see, this is all important. If you are in the greatest spiritual battle for the hearts and souls of mankind in the history of the world, and we are in, right now, the greatest battle for the hearts and souls of mankind in the history of the world, We are in it. It's not a debate. It's not like you get to choose or I get to choose. It's a fact, whether I choose it or you choose it or don't choose it or whatever. That's irrelevant. It is a fact that we're in the greatest battle for the hearts and souls of mankind in the history of the world. Period. End of story. We can prove it a million different ways. But if you ask me to prove it, I would be so shocked at your stupidity that it's not that I can't prove it. I would just be wondering, why are you so dumb that you're even asking me this question? I don't mean to be unkind, but that's kind of the perspective that any thinking person would have. Like, what cave have you been living in, Charlie, for the last 25 years? Where have you been? It's blatantly obvious that we're in the greatest battle for the hearts and souls of mankind in the history of the world. Not only is it blatantly obvious to anybody who has a brain that uses it, the data, the information regarding this greatest battle is screaming at us at a deafening noise level from our televisions, our radios, our internets, our social media, the society around us, so on and so forth. So, in light of priority, let's go back to using the term the battle for the mind. Many Christians speak on the topic, the battle for the mind. And that's fine. They minister to people at one level. Unfortunately, it's a kindergarten level, but they're ministering to people at a kindergarten level, so I thank God for that. It's better than nothing. But you see, it's all a matter of priorities. Intelligence and wisdom always synchronizes or links up with priorities. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you're in a car, and I'm borrowing this on a true factual story that occurred to someone I know and to a number of people I know. And this occurred about 20 years ago. They were driving down the freeway in an SUV on the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, which is the world's greatest parking lot. And somebody illegally cut in front of the driver, and it was a driver with 3 small young children. And this person who illegally cut in front of the person driving did what they should have done, which was to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting the car that illegally inserted itself in front of them. Now, when this driver slammed on the brakes, you've been in situations where there's an emergency or there's a crisis event. Every one of you have, if you think carefully. And you will remember that when you were in that crisis event or that emergency, it literally is as if time slows down and everything moves very slowly. It's not like it's moving sleepily or lethargically. It's just that the shock, the intensity, the danger of what you're experiencing is so great that I believe God gives your nervous system an automatic response in which I believe the Lord allows your body and mind to actually slow things down, even though things are not being slowed down, to give you the opportunity to make choices and decisions and actions which can save your life and the life of your loved ones. That's what I mean by that. And that's a common thing that you've probably heard, that in a crisis event, like right before there's a car crash, in the second or whatever between the time of the brakes and an impact, it's a very tiny actual measurement of time, but it moves slowly. Okay, so back then, this particular well-known automobile company that made at that time one of the, not the most expensive, but it was one of the nicest looking SUVs on the market. And this person that I knew was driving it. This company still makes this SUV, and it's still one of the best-selling SUVs on the market. And it has been ever since they started making SUVs. But like many American car companies, they lack integrity. And that integrity is symptomatic of the fact that the very heart and soul of America lacks integrity. And this idea of cheating and lying and fudging is epidemic not only in the lives of people, but in the lives of corporations and government and the military and churches, et cetera, et cetera. So this car company knew that their SUV had a serious defect in that if a person had to hit the brakes hard while driving with passengers, usually young children, in this SUV had a notorious and awful record for flipping over and often killing or very, very seriously wounding or injuring the adult or children that were in the car. So let me repeat it. This SUV back then was notorious for if you slammed on the brakes to avoid an accident, because it was not made right, because it was not balanced right, because the right technology was not put into it on purpose to save money. Because when I was aware of their track record, this problem of their SUVs flipping over was a problem that they had, and it was an epidemic problem they had, with countless thousands of people being injured or killed. And yet they never bothered to fix it. And so in this model, they didn't bother to fix it. So the point is, when time slows down, you have to make those critical decisions. And so after the accident, and it was only by the grace of God, and I believe the angels of God, that the driver of this car survived. The 3 children survived, because when I went to see the car after it was towed from the wreck, it looked like the car was dropped out of an airplane. And the tragedy is that it wasn't only this American car. There were a number of American SUVs on the market, and still are, by the way, where they have not sufficiently fixed the car in terms of they have a nasty habit of flipping over in an accident. Now, so we have 2 things going on. We have a lack of integrity in the manufacturing of cars. We have a lack of integrity in a driver who illegally endangers everybody by illegally crossing in front of the car in front of it. And then we have the adult driver who has to make critical life and death decisions in a nanosecond. Like, do I hit the brakes totally hard? Do I have time to slow it down first? Do I maneuver over to the right or left? Because you have to anticipate that since the car in front of you is slammed on its brakes, and the car behind you is slamming on its brakes, and the other car is pulling in from another lane, obviously there's maneuvering going on by other cars, and you only have a limited number of options. And so the point is this: America, our nation, is like that SUV I talked about. There is a car that has, let's say, metaphorically, placed itself in front of the direction of America, and that car has done that in a dangerous way, and because of that, it has endangered the lives of all the inhabitants of this car we're calling metaphorically America. So there's no question that because this car is immediately in front of America, and the car called the SUV called America is a certain amount of fractional seconds away from impact, a deadly impact with the car in front of it. And so it's not a question of, is this SUV metaphor car called America. It's not a question of whether or not this car called America will crash into the car in front of it. It's a matter of how fast, what kind of maneuvering is available to the driver. Is it possible for the driver to turn the wheel sharp enough and not flip over and avoid impact? Is there any way at all that the driver, and the driver only has less than seconds to think this up, and it's moving in slow motion, the human consciousness, the driver is exploring all options to avoid impact, to reduce the severity of impact, to protect the passengers of the car. The human mind is a marvelous God-given human biocomputer. And so all this processing and analyzing is going on. And then it's obvious that the only option is to slam on the brakes at a particular intensity so that the car will hopefully reduce the speed of impact significantly, or if the unusual expectation happens, the brakes actually stop the car from smashing into the car in front of it. All very dicey decisions. So here we are in this car called America. Except in our case, this car that is mysteriously pulled in front of our nation, a metaphor, has been there, relatively speaking, a long time, and we're traveling in this SUV called America, which is America, and it's obvious to anyone whose eyesight works and their perceptive abilities work, and they have even a minimal amount of brain power, and if they're paying attention, it's obvious that we are getting into the place of great danger, and the closer we close in on this car in front of us, the greater the percentage is that there will be an impact, a physical impact. The question is, how severe will that physical impact be? And at this late stage, is there any opportunity to do a total turning of the steering wheel while slamming on the brakes and hopefully not flipping the car over to escape impact? All of these things have to be processed. Now, I'm saying that to use it as a metaphor. It's not a perfect metaphor, but the reality that America has been in danger has been an observable, measurable, objective reality that is evident all around us. And unlike the car, the actuality of America as a nation and a society being in danger, that has been at a crisis point since the 1960s. But in actuality, this danger has been growing in severity and intensity for the last 93 years. In other words, if you had been paying attention, if you had been analyzing what was happening, if you had been keeping up with things by reading and thinking and observing, if you were engaged and committed to your life, the life of your children and grandchildren, and most of all, if you were committed to the Lord, let's just take it at that. If you were committed to the Lord Jesus Christ, you would have sensed the divine obligation to pay attention, to use your mind, to look out for danger, and then if you saw danger, which you certainly would have seen danger because it wasn't in hiding, you would have mapped out an appropriate plan ahead of time to deal with it so you wouldn't come to a super crisis situation which is so intense that America could literally cease to exist as a free nation as we know it. And that's where we are, by the way. If you think that where we are now is nothing less than America being in the place of such a great danger that it could literally cease to exist as the free America we once knew, if you say that that is sensationalism and that is paranoia or that is unreasonable, I would suggest to you that either you have a defective mind that's incapable of analytical, critical thinking and comparison with historical facts, or I would say that you deliberately, with an act of your will, choose to enter a land of make-believe and pretend that the danger is not there, to exempt yourself from the responsibility of doing anything about it, which, by the way, is the ultimate act of selfishness. So one would think, especially regarding people who claim to be Christians, who claim to be born again, who claim to love the Lord, one would think that on the basis of your claim to be a Christian and your claim to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I mean, I hear Christians all the time telling me they have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I hear Christians all the time telling me they're born again and they have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay, so if you tell me you're born again and you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, I'm not looking to see perfection in your life, because perfection is non-existent in any Christian's life. What I'm looking for is to see an attitude of your heart and mind where you are poised or pointed in the direction of truly desiring to do God's will and to do everything you can by faith to do God's will. Because if you're walking with the Lord and you're born again, you could do nothing less, because Christ lives inside you. And Christ lives inside you in the form of the Holy Spirit, which is the Spirit of truth. Now, so the Christian, the true Christian, should automatically be concerned, committed, aware of, educated, and decisively in action in order to be about his or her Father's business and take care of this gift of freedom, this gift of prosperity that we call the United States of America. Now, if your relationship with the Lord is either non-existent and you're faking it, or your relationship with the Lord is so shallow that it's all about you and yourself, and you kind of use Jesus as a decal, then you wouldn't have much of a concern. But any so-called normal, healthy, loving parent, loving mother, loving father, it would be the norm, or it has been the norm in society after society, that parents or mothers and fathers most often are more concerned about the happiness and the fate of their children than they are regarding their own lives. So just being a normal human parent, having what's called filial love, which is the love between a parent and their child, or a brother and sister, or mother and father, that's called filial love. The normal parent would have such a depth and degree of that love that they would do most anything they could to make sure that their children's lives in the future had opportunity, had freedom, had financial prosperity, had been safeguarded. No parent who's normal in the head, no parent who loves their child would even think about giving their child a future, which essentially means they're going to live in a prison camp, a re-education camp, with an economy like a third world nation, in an America that has been so looted and ransacked that it has become a socialist dictatorship and a totalitarian state. No loving parent in America or the world would be so willfully negligent to allow that to happen to America. No normal parent should or would, because it's anti-love. To know in your heart and mind that you are giving your kids over to a tyranny, to a disastrous economy, to a brutal loss of freedoms and persecution because they're Christians. To know they're going to pass on to their children essentially a totalitarian or police state, only a monster of a parent would do that. Okay? Then we have grandparents, other people's children, adults themselves at different ages. So the concern is not only for your children, it's for your children's children. Your concern is not only for yourself, it's for yourself in your older years and other people in their older years. And if you really have a quality of God's love in your heart, your concern is for more than just your children, it's for other people's children. That is what a normal, sane, loving person that doesn't even have to be a Christian should theoretically possess in their heart. So I want to propose to you a question, because we have an oxymoron here. We have a contradiction. And here's the contradiction. If you study the facts like I have, you don't even have to study the facts like I have. Just if you have minimally studied the facts, if you have a minimal knowledge of history, if you have a minimal knowledge of what's going on, if you have self-educated yourself just even on a minimal level, if you pay attention to a multitude of counselors or experts, you will see that they're saying essentially the same thing that I'm saying. I'm not the only one saying this. There are very intelligent, very bright people all over the United States, some of them on media, not mainstream media, but alternative media, who are saying this. There are many brilliant men and women who are saying this. Researchers, authors, they're saying this. Very few pastors are saying this. Their silence is conspicuous. So they know that the wolves are at the door. The handwriting's on the wall. Because you see, if you're paying attention, and this has nothing to do with Democrat versus Republican. This has to do with ideology and content. If you're paying attention to what the various political candidates in both parties are standing for and what they propose for solutions, you will hear from both parties a decision-making process, a planning process that is based upon a completely faulty intellectual, economic, societal, historical foundation. In other words, what they are proposing is so blatantly false. It will fail outrageously. What they're proposing is guaranteed to fail. What they're proposing is guaranteed to bring in tyranny, totalitarianism, poverty, an economic crisis and crash, martial law. What they're proposing is to literally, they think it's an economic solution. But if they had a minimal understanding of history and a minimal ability to compare their plans with the nations, the record and history of nations that have utilized those same plans, they would quickly understand that their plans are guaranteed to destroy America in the most, and freedom in the most terrific ways. It's guaranteed. It's a mathematical fact. So, it's one party predominantly, but it's also the other party. Because you have many people in the other party whose true allegiance is not to the American people. It's to the international bankers and the globalists and the heads of multinational corporations that secretly finance their campaigns. And these men, who pretend to be patriotic Americans, who pretend to be concerned for America, are in reality sellouts. They're traitors. They care nothing for your children and grandchildren. They care nothing for their own children. They are soulless men and women who are on the take, who've been bought off years ago. So, given the fact that we have so many people in the seats of power who have plans that are guaranteed to destroy our nation, or guaranteed to accelerate the destruction of our nation, they have plans that they're promoting that are guaranteed to bring in a totalitarian state and crash our economy and take away all of our freedoms. And none of this is paranoia. This is all the lesson of historical fact available to anybody. And then we have a President Donald Trump, controversial. But we have so many Christians who are so imbecilic, infantile, uneducated, unlearned in their thinking processes, that they don't have thoughts of their own. They have empty heads, because what is in their heads is what the mainstream media puts in their heads. And so Trump, with all his faults or whatever, is the only candidate, the only president in probably 100 years in American history who is not bought and paid for by the globalist elite, who is not in the business of being a traitor and selling out our country. You can say whatever you want about him, but he loves our country. He is going against the swamp. He's going against the deep state. He's going against the insiders. He's going against the shadow government. And he's trying to rebuild America's greatness, preserve our unique freedoms, like freedom of religion, and cause our economy to grow. Because without growth in our economy, we don't have the resources to fulfill the prophetic destiny that I believe that God has for America. So I realize I said a lot there. There's probably a lot to think about, but it really comes down to this. If you claim to care, if you claim to be someone who loves God, if you claim to be a parent who loves their child, and if you make these claims and yet at the same time you are so confused in your head, you are so lacking wisdom and knowledge, you are completely devoid of guidance, you cannot perceive the situation correctly. So when it's all said and done, you are making, just like a person in that car, nanoseconds before the auto crash, but you are making wrong decisions. You are making decisions because of your ignorance, and you chose to be ignorant because you chose not to educate yourself. You're making decisions that will guarantee that your children will live in a hellhole. And you can, enter fantasy land and pop a couple of tranquilizers to do whatever you want to do. But the reality is, by your collective actions, you are guaranteeing, you are sending your children not to summer camp. You're sending your children to a forever camp, at least in terms of their lifetime on earth, of tyranny, slavery, a police state, a dictatorship, something that you never dreamed could happen. But had you bothered to study the lessons of history, you would have known it could always happen. It can always happen. And then, if you say you love your children and your grandchildren and so on and so forth, how can you make these decisions? Really, I want to know this. Person to person. I'm talking to you personally. can't see you, but I know that you're there. So I want to ask you a direct question, heart to heart. How can you continue to go about your life as you have been going, knowing full well that your actions or lack of actions are actually going to guarantee a nightmarish future for your children and grandchildren? And by that I mean they will live in a completely different America than you and I lived in. It will be an America as a police state and a totalitarian state. It will be America with a third world economy. It will be an America that is poverty-stricken, filled with violent crime and gangs. It will be an America that has been run down into the status of a third world nation. And on top of that, it will be a socialist America, which will make everyone equally poor and establish an armed police state to govern the population. And I'm asking you this question person to person because I really don't understand you. I'm not mad at you. I just don't understand you. How can you not be bothered in your heart with what you're doing, your decisions, your choices? How can you not be bothered? I know you must love your children and grandchildren. I mean, what parent is there that doesn't? How could you give your children and grandchildren this nightmare of a future? I don't understand. And then I'll be very specific, and I'm talking heart to heart to certain pastors. I'm not condemning you as a pastor. I'm just asking you, person to person, and I am a licensed pastor. I'm licensed 2 major licenses, plus a professor of eschatology or Bible prophecy at one of the most influential Christian universities and seminaries. I used to regularly lecture pastors from all over the nation at this college and seminary. So I want to ask you, as one pastor to another, one person to another, how can you continue to play the church game? How can you continue to play church? How can you continue to play the religious church game? And by that I mean, you know what I mean. And I'm not condemning you. I'm asking you, how can you continue to perform the show that you perform every week? And it is a show because you see, you're deliberately choosing not to deal with the tough challenges and situations, such as the very topic that I'm discussing now. You deliberately choose to hide that from your congregation, perhaps to appease your elders or the board or whatever. And so you're deliberately hiding from your people the brutal truth about where we're going in our nation. And this is what I want to ask you, and I'm not here to condemn you, I'm just here to ask you this. How doesn't your conscience bother you when you are complicit by your silence, and you're complicit by your lack of willingness to speak the truth? Knowing that by your lack of willingness to speak the truth and only present a very positive, partial gospel, knowing that by doing that, you are complicit in accelerating the reality that your children, your congregation's children, their grandchildren, the people you love and know, are going to grow up in America totally different than the one you did. It will be a hardcore socialist police state with a third world economy, no freedoms, martial law, and I could go on. History is filled with examples. How can you live with yourself? This is not for condemnation. I'm puzzled. Because you see, if I tried, I'm not any better than you. Let's just get that straight right now. I'm not any holier than you. I'm not any more spiritual than you. I'm not any more self-denying than you are. But I couldn't go to sleep at night or go through the days knowing that I was silent about these subjects and knowing that my silence is basically, oh, I'm voting yes, I'm empowering this disaster. I'm ensuring that this disaster will come upon God's people by my silence. How can you not feel the guilt of that, or the responsibility of it? I know you feel the guilt of it. So there's one or two things. You're suppressing it. You're playing mind games, which allow you to rationalize it, because we're all the same as human beings. We all have to deal with guilt in different areas. And the way we deal with guilt in different areas, because especially for somebody who's born again, the way you deal with guilt is it will drive you out of your mind. So we as human beings, we play clever mind games with ourselves. We rationalize, we justify, and maybe that's how you deal with it. You justify it, you rationalize it. I don't know what it is that you're doing, but the truth of the matter is, your sermons, which refuse to acknowledge the truth of what is happening, how fast it's happening, and the destruction and devastation and heartbreak that it's going to bring. By your silence, you're causing this to happen. Now, I didn't say that to condemn you or to put you down. I'm just speaking to you person to person and telling you I'm telling you what you already know. That's just the way this is. So here's the question I want you to think about. It goes back to that car, the American car, where another car has illegally inserted itself in front of it on the freeway. The driver begins to slam on the brakes to either reduce the velocity on impact or to maybe maneuver around the car or to cause the car to roll to a stop before it impacts. But a quirk happens because of the lack of integrity in the American automobile manufacturer. The SUV flips over when it shouldn't have flipped over and almost kills everybody in the car. So I want you to think about this for just a moment. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report, and I encourage you and suggest that you send this message far and wide personally by sending the link of this program to people that need to hear it, because censorship on the internet is rampant, but you can do an end run around censorship by sending programs like this, the Paul McGuire Report, to people that you know need to hear it. So visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in a second, and we're going to talk more on the future, what's coming quickly, and what we can do about it. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. We've been talking about where America is going with great speed right now, and the definition of where America is going is being created by the rhetoric of political candidates and the media of both parties. But we keep hearing similar visions being shared. And the primary vision that is being shared, which is being offered up as the most realistic solution to America's problems, the most realistic solution to the suffering of so many people in America. The primary solution that's being offered up is the solution of socialism and globalism, as if by America becoming socialist and more globalist, this would solve all of our problems. And then, of course, for those of you that read or study, you realize that every great communist Marxist leader has repeatedly said that there is no such thing technically as socialism. Socialism is simply the first step into communism or Marxism. So what we're really saying when we're proposing that socialism is the answer for America, what we're really saying is that Marxism and communism is the answer for America, because socialism is nothing more than an intermediate step into Marxism or communism. So what's the problem with that? We have so many people, young people, adults, all convinced that this is true. Socialism, moving into a global society, will solve all of our problems. It will provide social justice. It will fairly redistribute the wealth. People will get free education, free health care, all good paying jobs. And basically, we will create a kind of paradise on earth. These are the basic tenets and promises of Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, and of communism and of socialism. So what's the problem with it? Well, this is where it is essential that you educate yourself, and it is absolutely essential that you educate yourself to the point that you know what you're talking about, that you're just not a mindless idiot or a puppet whose mind and thinking is being manipulated by external sources, and you've been programmed through the educational system and the media to believe in the falsehood and the mythology that socialism and globalism is going to bring about paradise on earth for mankind and take us into a new golden age. That is false. And many of you and many of the people that you know, or people that I know, are among that sizable percentage of Americans who believe that socialism and globalism will provide social justice, fair wealth redistribution. It will help people. It will give them free education, free health care, good paying jobs, and all of our problems will be solved. Because the basic premise is once we tax the rich and the super wealthy and the middle class, once we tax them, we can take all that money and we can spend it on healthcare, education, opportunities, social justice, fair wealth redistribution, and create a perfect society that will solve all of our problems. Okay, this is where it's very important to have your cards on the table and to know what you're talking about. There is an epidemic of Christian pastors and denominational heads and people, Christians who work for denominations, district supervisors, all kinds of stuff, Christian seminary professors, Christian teachers, Christian pastors, Christian youth group leaders. There's an epidemic of them who all, to varying degrees, believe that socialism and globalism and things of that nature will solve all the problems and suffering in America and across the world. And in fact, they believe that socialism and globalism and things like that are actually exactly what Jesus would do. They believe that socialism, redistributing the wealth, free health care, free education, that's the most Christ-like thing to do. Therefore, they believe that socialism and globalism is the closest economic social plan to Christianity and the teachings of Jesus Christ. That's how deeply they believe in it. Now here we come to a very serious crossroads. It's a crossroads of life and death. And this is where we have to mature whatever side of the fence you're on, you have to mature, you have to step forward, and you have to be willing to be honest and have integrity with yourself. And you have to say to yourself that I do not have the right to make an intelligent decision or a decision that will affect others, that will affect my children and grandchildren and affect my society. I do not have the right, and I am not qualified to make those decisions until I have done my homework and I have read not just one source. I've read from multiple sources, pro and con, and I have prayed, and I'm assuming you have studied the Bible adequately. And then you need to do historical research. This doesn't take all that much time, by the way. This doesn't take a year. You can do this in a couple of weeks if you wanted to. And then you need to look at the historical track record of all the nations who went down the path of socialism and globalism, and read historically what factually happened to them. And it's really simple for you to do that because every nation that went socialist experienced the exact same set of results, without exception. And so this is where you have to be mature enough, step up to the plate and say, I'm going to keep my mouth shut until I know what I'm talking about. But then you need to take the time to educate yourself and know what you're talking about. Because there are answers. You don't have to be bleary-eyed and listen to the propaganda and the salesmanship and the lies. You just have to know some historical facts. So let's give you a couple of bullet points. Bullet point number 1. Not one single socialist, communist, Marxist society has ever delivered on the promises that it made to the people. Not one. There are no exceptions. Sorry to break it to you. You will hear socialists and communists always give the same rationale for that. And they will say, well, look at the Scandinavian countries, like Denmark and this country. They were successful. And those are socialist nations. And they use that as their proof that communism, Marxism, and socialism is successful. And that is a completely faulty premise, because the success of these Scandinavian countries like Denmark has nothing to do with the fact that they went socialist. Their success and their prosperity is based upon the fact that for hundreds of years they were a capitalist society with a strong biblical Protestant work ethic, and they worked hard, they planned, they invested, they obeyed the laws of capitalism. And because of their hard work and their Christian and Protestant work ethic, those Scandinavian countries accumulated a great deal of wealth along family lines, a great deal of wealth that the government has, a great deal of wealth, a great deal of technology. So when communists and socialists point to them as an example of how socialism works, that is a faulty example, because the success of Denmark and the other Scandinavian nations has nothing to do with socialism. It happens to do with the fact that they were prosperous, capitalist Christian nations. And they accumulated a great deal of wealth, a great deal of assets, a great deal of equity. So, of course, when they went socialist, they had plenty of money to make a lot of their plans work. But this was not money that was ever generated through a socialist communist system. This was money that was generated by the previous capitalist system. And you have to make that distinction. Because what you have to do is say, show me a nation which produced the wealth redistribution, the human freedoms, the prosperity. Show me a nation anywhere, Denmark or wherever. Show me a nation which went socialist and then produced the prosperity and the wealth redistribution and everything else. And you will not find one. See, the only time you can find one is when you cheat and you're really showing us a capitalist nation. But any nation that went through a revolution into socialism, Marxism, or communism always ended up in the same place. Desperate poverty for the masses, economic crash, the people were enslaved and lost all their freedoms. The communist socialist nations are always dictatorships or police states. People have no freedoms. They have no freedom of religion. They have no freedom of the press. They have no freedom of anything. And they're poor. They're bankrupt. They work as slaves. They live in a police state where they can be shot and killed without any trial or court proceedings. And they kill people by the millions. They're sent to death camps, concentration camps, re-education camps. That is the norm. That is the norm of every single communist, socialist, Marxist nation on planet Earth. And there are no exceptions. Now, some of them are still in the socialist stage, and they haven't yet moved from socialism to Marxism and communism. But when they do, that will play out. And that's why you can look across planet Earth and you will not find one single communist nation that anybody wants to sneak into. You can't find anyone living in a communist nation where people want to illegally migrate into that country or sneak into that country. Nobody wants to sneak into or illegally immigrate into a communist, socialist, Marxist nation because they're all hellholes. And everything that they promise is a lie. There is no quality universal health care. There is no fair wealth redistribution. There is no freedom and human rights. There is no equal opportunity, free education. There is no great paying jobs. The entire thing is one massive deception and lie. What they get instead is a brutal dictatorship and poverty. And they say, well, then, we'll have fair wealth redistribution. That has never happened once. What you have is a communist elite of millionaires and billionaires, and then you have the slave class. There's no middle class. The only middle class that exists is in nations like America, which is a capitalist Christian nation. Communist, socialist, Marxist nations never produce a middle class. They have the slave class, the lower class, and they have the super rich upper class. And the entire thing is a lie. And nobody can challenge you on that because it's an historical fact embedded in stone. So, that being the case, and it is, the only people who would believe in the socialist message, in the communist message, the Marxist message, the only people who believe that, the only people who would volunteer to be part of that communist, socialism, Marxism revolution or vote for candidates who espouse those beliefs, the only people who would try to bring in a communist, socialism, Marxist order are those people who have no accurate knowledge of history. In other words, the only people who would go for that are those who are completely ignorant, completely uneducated fools who are easily manipulated. Because communism, Marxism, and socialism only advances by propaganda and deception. And those are the facts. Those are the facts. So when you hear a pastor or a youth pastor promoting socialism or using socialist words and saying it's next to Christ, that individual has no idea what they're talking about. They're absolute imbeciles and idiots. And if you really want to cut to the chase, they're liars because they're lying to the people. They don't know anything about the accurate historical track record of communism, socialism, and Marxism. All they know is what they've been brainwashed to know, because they never bothered to roll up their sleeves and to be diligent, to seek for guidance like God commands, and to study and educate themselves. And that's the problem that we're dealing with in America right now. You see, this is the problem. We have this collision of worldviews coming down upon us right now. We are in the greatest battle for the hearts and souls of mankind in the history of the world. And it's a battle of ideas. And the reason it's a battle is you have Satan promoting the lies of communist, Marxist, socialist societies, which are complete lies. They're all hellholes. And then you have people who are telling you the truth. But people who are telling people the truth are not necessarily being listened to. So this makes it a matter of, how do we break through the lies? How do we break through the fog? How do we break through the spiritual deception and communicate a message of truth about all of these areas, a message of warning, and motivate God's people and other people? How do we motivate them and educate them to step up and to the plate and act decisively and stand up for what is right decisively, while we still have the freedom to do so? Because once a nation goes into a communist, socialist, Marxist dictatorship, the door to the prison cell is slammed shut from the inside. Once you go communist, socialist, or Marxist, there's no going back, because the media is shut down. You have a militarized police. You live in a police state. There are mass arrests. People are sent to re-education camps or concentration camps. There's mass murder, mass shooting, mass incarceration. Many of you don't really know how bad it is. And you need to get some videos and stuff to watch to see what how this all plays out. And you have Hollywood lying to you and the media lying to you. Why? Because ultimately, it's in the best interest of the globalist elite to have a communist, Marxist, socialist system. All of this is so imperative at this time, and we don't have much time. Any series of events, catastrophes, crisis, an election where people thought a particular candidate would win, and because they rigged it, the candidate that you thought would win lost, and the next thing you know, you're plunged into the middle of a socialist, Marxist, communist society, which always becomes a dictatorship. Your freedoms are gone. You have no idea how quickly and rapidly a total transformation of a society can occur. And America is not immune from the historical process. So I want to challenge you and exhort you and confront you, because true love confronts. You see, if I didn't confront you, I wouldn't love you. If I just whisper sweet nothings and pious platitudes and never connect the dots and never speak to you about reality, I don't love you. Because I'm more concerned about myself, and I'm allowing you to walk into a pit of destruction. That's not love. The first thing you need to do is to be educated as quickly as you can as to the historical, social, political, economic, spiritual dynamics that happen to a society as it goes into a totalitarian lockdown. You need to know how it can be avoided. You need to know who are the people and organizations that are secretly maneuvering things behind the scenes. And you need to know how to deal with it practically, spiritually, and intellectually. This is why I've written my brand new book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Souls of Mankind in the History of the World, which is what I consider one of my most important books. Now, as an incentive for you to get the book so that you can be educated and up to speed, if you pre-order the book now, you will get a copy of The Greatest Battle mailed to you as soon as it's printed, before it's released to the general public. And number 2 is you'll get a financial discount off the price of the book. And number 3 is you'll get a personal autographed copy. When you pre-order the book, you're agreeing to pre-order it. That means you're buying it before it has been printed. And we're in the final stages of editing. After editing comes printing. Then for those people who have pre-ordered it, it will be rushed to you before it's released to the general public. But please understand that pre-order means exactly what pre-order means. You're ordering it before the book has been printed. And as a benefit of doing that, you're getting it sent to you before it's released to the general public, and you're getting a financial discount off the price of the book, and you're getting an autographed copy. But remember, you're going to have to wait for the pre-order to come in. I'm in the final stages of editing it. Then after that, it gets set up for the printer, then it gets printed, and then it gets directly mailed to you. But the book isn't finished yet. That's why it's called a pre-order. Now, relatively speaking, it's a minimal wait. I can't tell you exactly what date it'll be released on. That has to do with a number of factors, the printer's schedule, et cetera, et cetera. But I encourage you to pre-order the book now and order multiple copies, because this book will explain to you and teach you things that I don't think you will have read anywhere else. And knowledge is power, and you will have the knowledge and the power to overcome, to help others to overcome, and to really know what's going on, because you have to combat the illusion, the lies, the propaganda that's all around you. And I consider this book, entitled The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Souls of Mankind in the History of the World, one of the most urgent and important books I've ever written. And that's why it's been very tough for me to write. Not tough that I don't feel inspired. I feel overwhelmed with inspiration. But trying to make sure that I communicate the truly important things, and I communicate it in a way that's, first of all, keeps your attention in a fast-moving style, and communicate it in a way where you don't have to be, like a college professor to understand it. I write my books for ordinary people to read, and I write them to be fast-moving and engaging. But it will deliver to you all kinds of information and truth that is simply not available anywhere else. And it's not bragging, it's true. This book will change your life, and it will help you. And to the degree that you're able to communicate the truths in it to other people, either by buying them a copy of the book. We have lots of people who are pre-ordering the book to use in their home Bible studies and prayer meetings. We have pastors who are pre-ordering this book, The Greatest Battle, to use in their Bible studies. This isn't your typical sleepy, evangelical playing church book. If that's what you're looking for, this is the wrong book. This book is a sword of truth. It packs a punch. Okay, and when I say it packs a punch, it's going to rock your world, and you need to have your world rocked. It's not going to instill fear in you. It's going to wake you up and give you power. This book delivers a punch like you have no idea. And I mean that in a good way. It's a punch that slams the principalities and powers and sets the readers free. Because I don't write books to play games any more than I speak to play games. When I speak on the radio or at a conference or at a Paradise Mountain Church meeting, which, by the way, we have another Paradise Mountain Church meeting coming up very soon. Go to paulmcguire.us and check out the date and time. But whatever I do, God has given me a gift of communication. So in whatever communication realm I'm dealing with, whether it's writing a book or speaking or whatever, I consider having failed if I have not delivered the truth with an intensity of force that is powerful enough to smash and obliterate the chains and the shackles of blindness and bondage and captivity off people. Let me say it again, because this is, if you want to know what's in my head, it's kind of like very warrior-esque, even though that's not a word. Whenever I write a book or make a movie or a video or speak at a conference or speak on this radio program or minister, I purpose in my heart, I dedicate the time to the Lord, and I purpose in my heart that I am engaging a spiritual adversary in any media arena that I'm in. And so whether it's on this program or in a book, I know that I, through my words and the communication abilities that God has given me, I know that I am engaging, I'm fighting against principalities and powers and the dark unseen forces of wickedness in heavenly places. And I know that those demonic powers are not necessarily possessing God's people, because theologically I don't believe demons can possess people that are saved. But I do believe that demonic powers, demonic blindness, demonic confusion has come upon God's people and their perceptions externally. So when I write a book, it's designed not to be an academic list of facts. I write a book to deliver a haymaker into the jaws of demonic powers and knock them into the abyss. I'm serious. This passage about the kingdom of heaven suffering violence and the violent take it by force is very much a part of my DNA when I write a book. I, like you, am a man or a woman of God. And when I come into the throne room of God, by the blood of the Lamb, I come in there to receive power from on high. The word is dunamis, for dynamite power of God. And the goal is to engage the spiritual enemy and hit the spiritual enemy with such force that the blinders are blown off the eyes of God's people, that whatever's making them deaf is destroyed, whatever's making them confused or bewildered or fearful, whatever principalities and powers are in that arena, that they are being reckoned with. And when I say reckoned with, there's only room for one of us to be in that arena. That's either God and the Holy Spirit or that demon. Okay? And if I've done my job correctly, that demon is gone. Okay? So you may say, well, this guy's crazy. Well, I may be crazy. But I'd rather be crazy and advance the kingdom of God than be sane and hiding in my crib and playing church. Let's just put it that way. So you need to get this book, because deliverance is in the book. Wisdom is in the book. An anointed understanding of the multidimensional warfare we're in is in the book. This book is iron sharpens iron. If you come in reading the book and you're somewhat dull-witted, that's okay. The sharpness of the sword of the Spirit in this book, The Greatest Battle, will sharpen you. You will go through a training process when you read the book. The book will be fun. The book will be engaging. But it's the equivalent of going through a high-level military preparedness training boot camp for some kind of special operations or some kind of elite military program. Because after all, you are soldiers of the cross, spiritual warriors. And this book is going to put you through an intensity of training that will make you dangerous to the devil. Because a Christian who is not dangerous to the devil is basically useless. Every Christian should be an imminent threat and danger to the devil, because they should pack so much of the power of the Holy Spirit and the Word of God that demons tremble when you come into the room. And right now, we have a church in America that's so weak, that's so pathetically weak and cowardly, that the world and the enemies of the gospel mock and laugh and basically treat biblical Christians with contempt. We're the only group in society where the media and everybody feels there's no consequences if you persecute, lie, insult Christians and Christianity. You know why that is? You know why that is? I'll tell you why it is. Because we have a bunch of cowardly pastors and cowardly Christians who, when Christianity, Christian morals, Christian beliefs, when Christianity is being insulted and defamed and attacked, instead of having real men of God with courage in their hearts, they'll say, no, that's unacceptable. And in a peaceful but loving spiritual way, we occupy the land and we say, no, you can't talk about our faith, our Lord, our relationship with Christ like that. And we don't back down. We don't try to be politically correct. We simply calmly say, that's non-negotiable. And then we say, you need to get off of our territory. And we need to be deadly serious about it. And if we had just a tiny percentage of men who would be men and women who would be women of God, because the power of God is dwelling in their hearts, I'm telling you, the enemy's just a bully. The enemy would back off. Okay? But I grew up in New York City, in Jackson Heights, Queens, okay? And, you learned the law of the streets very simply. I grew up being taught to be polite. So I would say, excuse me, can I please this, whatever. Well, that's fine, but it doesn't work on the streets when there's a bunch of bullies. So the bullies would mistook my politeness as weakness. And so they would attack me, they would spit on me, they would push me, they would punch me, etc. But what they didn't know is that I hung out with a group of guys on my block who were all nice guys, who were all taught to be polite. But we would spend sometimes 4 or 5 hours a day wrestling, fighting. And what we didn't realize is that we were training ourselves in kind of like martial arts and street fighting by practicing certain moves, how to flip somebody, how to put them in a headlock, how to do all these fighting positions. And we did it hour after hour, day after day. And every guy had different things to share, or their fathers would share stuff, like on how to fight. So I didn't realize it, but I was trained for physical confrontation for years and years. It was all in me. I didn't know it because we were just fooling around. But what we were really doing is drilling ourselves. So, there were a number of occasions when these bullies, because I had a nice demeanor and I was polite, they mistook that for weakness. And they would pounce on me. And I would turn the other cheek, maybe once or twice. Not because I was a Christian, just because I wasn't interested. It wasn't that I was afraid. It was just I was raised, not to be a bully. So they would continue to think that was weakness on my part, even though I would verbally say to them, basically stop it. But they didn't take me seriously. So when they did their next move, which was spitting on me, punching me or whatever, then that was it. I'd let them have it. And rather quickly, no matter what their physical size, I would flip them on the cement one way or the other. Flipping is a wrong word. I'd slam their bodies against the cement. I slammed their head against the cement. But I was still a gentleman, you understand? I wasn't, this was restrained force. Then I would pin as their face was in the cement and my knees were resting on their back, I would pin their arm up behind their back to a place where you can totally control someone, and if someone tries to resist you, you can just break their arm. And then, being a gentleman, not a bully, I could have just pounded them into the cement and left them in a pool of blood, but I was a gentleman. So I'd simply say, you're going to apologize to me now. And I would make them out loud in front of all their friends and my friends say a verbal apology to me by name, and then I'd let them go. And they left me alone, and they never bothered me again. But there had to be a show of force, because if there was no show of force, bullies will continue. Now, that happened many times growing up, and every time the results were the same. I remember going to summer camp. Yeah, I'm a nice guy. You know, we each have our own bed and trunk and stuff, and I don't know what it was. I was in this big tent with this other guy in the room, and for some reason, nobody's around, and he's shoving me and pushing me and punching me. Again, I guess because I was polite, and he mistook that as a sign of weakness. And I warned him. I said, look, don't touch me again or you're going to get hurt. And he, didn't take me seriously. So he pushed me, and I warned him again. And then the third time, before he had actually shoved me, I picked him up, put him on my shoulders, spun him around the room, and hurled his body from one end of the cabin to the other, and his body smashed against the wood floor. It was painful. He was crying, but he left me alone, and he respected me. It wasn't because I was Superman. It was just because we trained all the time. So the point is that I learned something. Many of you know exactly what I learned, and that is, when you're dealing with bullies, if you do not show appropriate restrained force that very clearly communicates that there are going to be extremely negative consequences in their life if they continue, if you don't make that point clear, or they're not convinced that you're capable of carrying out what you say you're going to do, that bully will continue to dominate and expand his control over your life and make your life a living hell. And that's what we have in America. We've had it in America for the last 50 or 60 years or more, and it's due to bad Bible teaching, plain and simple. We have cultivated a weak evangelical Christian church, which has no idea what Jesus Christ meant by turning the other cheek. And we have assembled a weak Christian culture, which, unlike any other group in society, the only group that people have no hesitation on picking on, attacking, and persecuting is Christians. And that's because we have never done what the Bible really says, and that is, we have never taken a stand. We're too busy playing church. And if you're going to a church that preaches that kind of false Christian passivity, then you're responsible for what happens. If the Christians had taken a stand against Adolf Hitler, he would never have been elected. But you see, there comes a point in history, there's coming a point in America, that opportunity to take a stand exists now. When the dynamics and the laws change, it's too late. Then your opportunity to take a stand and drive your enemy off of your land, that opportunity is over, because you're under a new set of rules, like a police state or martial law. Once you enter that environment, you have been conquered, you've been subjugated. But you know what? I can't talk to the average pastor or the average Christian about any of this because it's because they live in the world of playing church. They live in the sandbox world of like a little kid playing in a sandbox. You can't talk to them about the bigger realities, okay, and how to deal with reality and how to deal with threats to your life, your existence, your culture, your family, and children. That's the topic matter for adults. So where are the adults in the body of Christ? And by the way, where are the men in the body of Christ? I'm not talking about men who are unrestrained, who do illegal things, who can't be trusted with force or power because they can't control themselves. I'm talking about mature men, and yes, mature women, who know how to use legal force in a restrained, intelligent manner. So, with that, get yourself a copy of The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Souls of Mankind in the History of the World. Recognize where we are. Recognize that the clock is running out. I'm not playing games. The clock is running out. Anybody who tells you anything different than the clock is running out is lying to you. And don't twist Bible prophecy to suit your own comfort zone. Bible prophecy will happen exactly as Jesus Christ predicted it will happen. But right now, God gave us a commandment: occupy the land until he comes. If we fail to occupy the land until he comes, that simply means that instead of us occupying the land, we will be under occupation, which means we will be under domination, slavery, subjugation. We will become prisoners in our own land. That's what it means. And you need to wake up your friends, because we're about a hair's breadth from this happening. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Spread the word, please. Visit paulmcguire.us. Send a link of this message. Let's wake up the people of God as fast as we can. And let's make it unacceptable in our conversations, in our communications, or wherever. Not to be like overbearing, but to know what we're talking about and speak with quiet, forceful power, because we have the confidence that we know what we're talking about. But we need to declare within our own community and culture that it is unacceptable to play church. It is unacceptable to be a coward. It's unacceptable to be weak and give in and allow yourself and your children and grandchildren to be conquered and defamed. That is totally unacceptable. That day is over. That day is over. When we draw a line in the sand and we enforce it socially and we enforce it spiritually. God bless you. I'm your brother in Christ, and more importantly, I'm your servant in Christ, Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. You can help us get this message out to more people by becoming a prayer partner with this ministry. And I thank God for those of you that have chosen to become prayer partners. And you can help us by spreading the links of these messages far and wide. That helps us do an end run around censorship. And then you can help us by going to the Lord and simply asking Jesus Christ, Lord, how much do you want me to contribute financially or give in terms of a donation to Paul McGuire Ministries and Paradise Mountain Church? And then wait till the Lord speaks to you. And whatever the Lord puts on your heart, no matter how large the amount, how out of the box it is, then obey him. If the Lord tells you to give a small amount, but do it on a regular basis, then obey the Lord. Because you see, both ways we get to have the contributions we need to run this ministry. We can have lots of givers who give a small amount, but faithfully, that adds up. And then it also adds up when we have people who give a large amount. The important thing is that every single person is faithful to whatever God tells you to do. And I thank all of you for your obedience in every area. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.